Good afternoon. Welcome, everybody. Couple of things on the list. Just to remember that this meeting is operating under COVID level 2, so don't breathe on each other too much. We will, very shortly, just run around and introduce each other, and that will act as a registrar of who is here and where you're from. So that's an important thing to be done under these trying times. Stephen, could you kick us off, please, with a karakia? Thank you. Thank you, Stephen. So, as we're under level 2, there is no public presence at this meeting, and they're continuing on with an audio recording. So, committee members, if you can just make sure you use your mics, that helps with that process, please. Any apologies out there today? David Ashby will be here a wee bit later on. He's got another meeting to attend. Apart from that, is anything? Okay. Alrighty. Cam, could you lead off with introductions, please?
Sure. Cameron Henderson, Deputy Chair and Community Member of the Zone Committee.
Erin Harvey, Community Member of the Zone Committee.
Wendy Main, Community Member of the Zone Committee.
Sandra Stewart, Waimakariri District Councillor.
Kia ora, Judith Roper-Lindsay, Community Member of the Zone Committee.
John Cook, Ngāi Tuhuriri Runanga Rep.
Caroline Latham, Community Member.
Arapata Reuben, Ngāi Tuhuriri Runanga Rep.
Megan Hans, ECAN Councillor.
And I'm Michael Blackwell, Community Member and current Chair. Mr. Redman, could you carry on with introductions at your end, please? On my right is Murray, our excellent ECAN facilitator. Alrighty, any changes to the register of interest, which we need to record? Nothing there, really good. Which brings us straight to item 3, a presentation on the Kaiapoi River monitoring, which I think is a combined presentation between Adrian and Sophie from ECAN and WDC.
Thank you. I'll start. Just two things I've got here is the first one. On the last couple of meetings, you've been asking for what the current results we've been seeing on salinity incursions up the Kaiapoi River had been, and so this first, there's a graph in your notes here on the download we did recently of the salinity logger at the Mandeville Bridge in the middle of Kaiapoi. First thing, this had been operating since the end of November last year. We finally managed to get into, we were intending to download it, but then got defeated by the COVID lockdown sort of process. It's taken us a while to get back since. So here is the results. Unfortunately, the logger failed at about the end of, about the middle of May, but that still gives us sort of six or 7 months of data, which is probably the critical period we'd normally see salinity intrusion. You can see there that pretty much during the periods at the end of November and December and early January, as per usual, there hasn't been any saline intrusion up the Kaiapoi River. The Waimakariri River flows stay quite high there. There were a couple of brief events of salinity moving up the Kaiapoi River in January, but otherwise, as per other years, we're seeing discrete periods of saline water moving up the Kaiapoi River in February, March and April. That are largely associated with low flows in the Waimakariri River, but also modified to some extent by the extent of the tide heights, particularly when we're getting those king tides or the higher tide periods. So really this adds to the previous couple of years of data we've got on here, and we're really lining up hoping to get this sort of converted into a sort of model in the near future when the NIWA staff we've been talking to are available to sort of chew this up into a more predictive model that'll make it useful. We certainly the winter there's been a low flow. There's been quite a low flow period in sort of July and August. So it's disappointing that the logger wasn't operating over that period, but we have put another logger in that'll be collecting that sort of data for the last couple of weeks, and that'll probably illustrate that these low flows we've been seeing are probably allowing salinity to come up the river in midwinter this year as well. So that's as far as we've got with salinity monitoring. The second paragraph I've got there is water quality monitoring of the Kaiapoi River. And I've just put a paragraph there to illustrate that if we were to routinely water quality sample the Kaiapoi River, we'd pretty much follow a similar site at the Mandeville Bridge there with continuously water quality monitoring data to actually illustrate what was happening under the complex sort of situation of twice-a-day tides plus backflow of the Waimakariri River plus all the other influences on a very dynamic river like this. We've sort of scoped and costed it out, and we hope to have that. We hope to get the approval in that in this year, but really it's the only way to really get important sort of water quality data on a river like this, like in the middle of Kaiapoi, that sort of teases apart all of these influences. And that's pretty much where I've got to. Any questions on those two items?
Yes. Sorry, me. I just wonder, has there been any biological monitoring on particularly, say, the banks of the Kaiapoi in this area, Mandeville? I'm thinking when I went there with Jessica, when she was our biodiversity officer, we found mud crabs there, and just wonder if anybody's looking at that.
We opportunistically noted it in our previous report. We haven't been routinely going back and sort of doing that, but yes, you're right. Mud crabs and mud crab burrows are probably the biggest indicator of saline influence that they arrive into that environment. I'm not sure whether Waimakariri district. Anything?
So yes, I have also tried to figure out how far up I can see the burrowing mud crabs, and yeah, up to at least the Canberra floodgate there are tunneling crabs. So it is a great, biotic indice of where that salinity is coming to, and there has been questions around whether that can destabilise the banks, which is could lead to some trees falling in, or some issues there.
Adrian, a question on what sort of equipment would be needed to measure the flows within the system. That's sort of crucial to the scope of the data that I think the community and would welcome some hard data on this. So what sort of gear would you require to put in to measure flows, as well as, I mean, you're talking about water quality, other parameters here, but what about flow?
Thank you, Councillor Stewart. Measuring flow within a tidal waterway is very difficult. Now, I'm not a hydrologist myself. I'd be liaising with my colleagues on this sort of subject, but certainly Silver Stream, the Ahoka Stream, the Cust Main Drain, and to some extent up the Cam, have all got flow recorders on them, and it would be the best indication would be summing those sort of flows and making an estimate as to whether there was any further gains below those. Certainly, in a very dynamic tidal environment, I don't think you could. I'm not. I doubt if you would be able to measure flow itself at the recorder site we're proposing at the moment. We certainly will be incorporating into that equipment a level gauge, so we more accurately measure the sort of water levels and the tidal influences and things like that, rather than inferring them from tide charts. But I think we'd be relying on flow measurements from the upstream sites and summing them together.
is it possible to put in equipment downstream of those tributaries to actually measure the tidal, the tidal flow both at high and low tide? And does ECAN have that sort of equipment?
I haven't really thought too much about that. Certainly, I would have to talk to my colleague, my sort of hydrometric colleagues about this and what value it would offer us. But certainly, we'd be starting with the tidal amplitude and measuring that very accurately to begin with, anyway. I'm not sure of how the value it would give us trying to determine what sort of peak tidal flows we'd be getting, but. And I suspect where you're coming from is discussing the flushing of the waterway and what the residence time. And from a water quality perspective, I'd be being more concerned about how long it takes that nutrient-rich water to be flushed out to the Waimakariri and how long it stays in the system. And probably the most relevant way to deal with that is probably doing dye studies in the river, putting a dye tracer quite high up in the system, and then measuring how long it takes for that to be extinguished out of the river. In other words, how many days you'd still be detecting it before it was flushed out at the bottom end of the river. And once again, the sort of logger technology we're putting in would be able to measure that sort of measurement to make that sort of estimate. But once again, we'd be talking to sort of modelers and hydrologists about that as well.
So Adrian, you said you were going to put in, I presume, another logger which will measure water quality in terms of nitrates and P and that sort of thing. And will that be going into the main stem of the Kaiapoi, or will it be going into the tributaries? And is there any benefit in having it in either or either?
Yes, thank you. At this stage, what I'm proposing here is a single site, but it's basically the same place we've been doing the salinity monitoring on the Mandeville Bridge, which is just upstream of the main William Street Bridge. And what I'd propose is we'd be putting two different loggers on there. A nitrate logger, which is the big issue people talk about in terms of the nitrogen coming down. And we already possess a nitrate logger in-house that is suitable for that site, that can cope with some salinity as well. The other piece of equipment we'd put in would be a multi-channel logger that is similar to what we'd often put in like Taiwahora, Lake Ellesmere, or Wairua, Lake Forsyth as well, which measures the sort of the chlorophyll A and the greenness of the water and the turbidity of the water and pH and dissolved oxygen and things like that. So that would be a single logger that would measure all of those parameters. And if we'd have those two situated together on the river, and then we could correlate that with backflow of Waimakariri River water, the tidal levels, and the upstream flows, to sort of tease apart what's generating the worst water quality, and sort of therefore where the best benefits are for suggesting improvements to the river.
Thanks, Adrian. Sophie, have you got anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, just a little bit to add to what WDC, Waimakariri District Council, is looking towards for management in the Kaiapoi River specifically. So it is, as everyone knows, coming up to our long-term plan timeframes, and it is, we only have one more year of the official Kaiapoi River Rehabilitation Working Program, which has had the tidal plantings, some terrestrial plantings. Then there's been the dredging works that our council's completed. So some of these things are coming to a natural completion, but we are looking forward to the future of what now might be in the LTP. So to try and inform that, we also have the some work by Jacobs Limited, which has been looking at sea level rise and coastal inundation modelling. You know, the hydrodynamic rather than just a bathtub model. We actually now have something that looks at how it happens to groundwater levels and how things actually move. So that really has helped us in the Kaiapoi area to see where we might have more of an estuarine area rather than a river area, and sort of, you know, the short, medium to long term future. So that I guess really is something that a committee might be interested to see, that modelling. It is public information, of course. So what we could do, for example, is continue projects that were in the Kaiapoi River Rehabilitation Program underneath the zipper. There's obviously several recommendations where that fits. Keen to hear your thoughts if you've got any questions on how to continue this program.
Thanks, Sophie. So the Jacobs report, you say it's currently being distributed, but you say it's. Can we have a presentation on that? I thought it would be very interesting to this group.
Yeah, I think there are specific public meetings that will be happening. Sorry, my phone's. I think my computer's ringing. So there will be public meetings specifically on this topic. I think Jared's in the audience who might know the exact dates and times of the Jacobs modelling, the coastal inundation, and natural hazards modelling work. I think it's
October,
end of September or early October. I think is what I've heard. Yeah.
And sorry, as part of that, then, so they modelled the hydrodynamics of the coastline, but they didn't come up the river, the estuary, in order to do that.
It's a multi-part
thinking of the
set of modelling. So there was the question of whether the coastline is degrading or degrading, and good news for us is that it's actually moving outwards. Surprisingly, Christchurch City, it's moving in. There's also tsunami risk, but that's separate. But I think that's it is one of our natural hazards. So fault lines, flooding, the flood mapping was redone. So the whole package that's actually really, really interesting that I would recommend this committee to have a briefing about, so I can organise that.
I'd like to request that. Oh, Mr. Chairman, I would like to request that we have a briefing on the Jacobs report, please. Natural hazards modelling of the Jacobs report, please. Thank you.
I'm sure Murray can help facilitate that. Any further questions? Sandra? I've got, if you just hold for 1 second, because I just want to overlay pretty much everything that both members have put forward. So September the 3rd, I think, which was last Thursday, the MPS freshwater kicked off. And I'm sure every council member or member of the farming community or member of the public are slowly trying to get their head around the ramifications of what the central government is now asking us. Particularly in terms of monitoring, follows on quite strongly with what we in our zipper have put forward. We want to know what's happening in our environment faster and in real time if possible. So definitely if you can forward that program, Adrian, to make it happen next week would be wonderful. If not, the week after. But we really need that real-time monitoring, given the fact I think we have a bathing site 100 metres downstream at the Kaiapoi River Bridge that's notified in the plan. So, and the requirements that they're putting there for E. coli are basically saying it has to be tested daily at the levels that that river is operating at the moment. So definitely work that needs to be done. So Sandra, did you want to?
Happy to move that we receive this update, but also want to add in, and it just endorses what the Chairman's just said, that we ask ECAN as a matter of urgency to install not only the nitrate logger, which I understand Adrian's already done, but this multi-channel logger that will measure all other water quality parameters in the Kaiapoi River. And I'm also very keen that ECAN take advice and install some measurement of flow within the main stem of the Kaiapoi River. I think it's essential that we move from anecdotal information on all these parameters, including flow, to trying to get some hard data in the next year or so. As we all know, the Kaiapoi River is a receiving environment for most of the, well, all of the tributary streams on the south side of the region, or the district, and we have absolutely no hard data on what are the dynamics of quality and flow within this river system, and I distinguish it from, as ECAN has done in the Zipper and Plan Change 7. This is from the confluence of the tributary streams down to the confluence with the Waimakariri, the main stem of the river. The data is virtually non-existent apart from the monitoring that takes place on the Lawa site for fecals at the Cure boating ramp. So seeing this river is under the new NPS qualifies for just about every element of degradation, it needs to be given an absolute paramount priority that some hard data is gathered urgently. And as the chairman said, it is a designated bathing spot at the William Street Bridge, and every summer we have kids leaping off into, as you're well aware, very highly contaminated water. So I just urge the Zone Committee to support the addition to this recommendation here, that as a matter of urgency we request ECAN install all its fancy gear and report back on a regular basis to us. If it's every 15 minutes, I'd like to see that we have a report every quarter, and I think that fits with the Zipper recommendations. And also, it is a Zipper recommendation that we gather some data on the stretch of river. So ask the rest of the committee members for their support on this addition. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. Do I have a seconder for that very long motion?
No, I was speaking to it as well.
Okay. That'll do for now.
My question is just around, you know, if ECAN are investing in monitoring, it's got to have a purpose and be for a reason. And given what Adrian was saying before about using the tributaries to measure flow and not really seeing a clear purpose for doing monitoring further down the main stem, I think that perhaps we need ECAN to go back to the subject and work out whether there would be any benefit from additional monitoring on the main stem, such as what Sandra's talking about.
So you're specifically talking volume there, not quality?
Well, we've already covered the quality in terms of the two loggers,
Mm-hmm.
or three loggers that are going to be in. So we're really talking about flow.
Flow, yep.
Yeah.
Committee to support the installation of the second logger, which is what I'm aiming for, that we actually support ECAN.
In that case, I would second the support for putting in the nitrates and the multi-channel loggers as you've described, Adrian. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a motion, a seconder. All those in favour? All right. Against? Carried. Thank you very much.
It's really only to tell us that there's nitrates in the kaipoi, isn't it? It's not going to tell us where it's coming from, the source.
Yes, indeed. Megan. Judith, just Megan's here.
I just wonder, obviously we've moved through that there, but I just wonder whether Adrian or Tim might be able to give a comment on what our next steps as council will have to be in terms of implementing MPS and looking at monitoring more broadly, and whether you're better off to look at whether the zone committee puts an intention that you want to be involved or have part of that conversation as we as a council will have to look at that. Tim or Adrian, are you able to comment where we're at, or if there at all, if we've even turned our heads to that yet? We've had a lot to process in the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, perhaps if I could just comment on it in terms of what's come through from the Action for Healthy Waterways, that nothing has changed in the sense of where to monitor, it's what to monitor that has changed. So it has introduced new parameters, of which quite a few of them we actually monitor already. There are a couple that we don't. I'm thinking of the ecosystem health and the fish in particular. But in terms of where to monitor, so what I'm getting at there is, the kaiapoi as a place to monitor within the zone. The MPS doesn't get down to that level of specific. Isn't that specific? Which then comes down to what has been specified in the plans. So under Plan Change 7, is the kaiapoi a separate monitoring unit or not? And I'm just not sure. I'm asking that question because I don't know. If it is, then there is certainly the expectation that all of the parameters that are mentioned in the NPS would be monitored. Well, it's not an expectation, they have to be. But as I say, quite a lot of those are already monitored. So there's just a few. So I guess what I'm really getting at, Councillor Hands, is our thoughts have been more about what is being monitored rather than where. Now, that's not to say that's not a good question. It's just that we haven't put a lot of thought into that yet. I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Part of what has driven this is the ZIPA recommendations, and ZIPA recommendation 40 sort of explicitly identified the Kaiapoi River and the degraded water quality of the Kaiapoi River for that has driven in many respects this recommendation. The other issue I would clarify at this point is once you get down into tidal waters like the Kaiapoi River, and I was talking about residence time, the water quality through the middle of Kaiapoi differs considerably from the water quality of the contributing tributaries, because they are flowing waters and the Kaiapoi River is tidal, so it's behaving more like a lake, and the water's there long enough to start growing into sort of green water and turbid water from algal blooms and things like that. That's why it deserves quite a separate monitoring technique, basically monitoring it more like a lake than like a river. And in some respects, the Action for Fresh Waters hasn't explicitly required us to monitor. It's not explicit on where to monitor, but it does at times talk more about looking at integrated rivers and interconnections with the sea, so it probably is focusing more us down into the areas we haven't focused on before, which is tidal waterways like this, and that may therefore be more sensitive nutrient environments because of that sort of lake-like nature.
Any further comment on item 3? Lovely. Thanks, Adrian, Sophie. Just before we move to item 4, just for the record of the meeting, just want to note that 2 gentlemen have joined us, Tim Davey from ECAN and Gerald Cleary from WDC. Right, Murray, item 4, committee updates. What would you like to update us on?
Thank you, Michael. The first of the updates is our regular update on proposed Plan Change 7. The key points to note here is the confirmation of the hearing on the 28th of September, and as you'll see, it'll run for over a 5-week period, but not consecutively, through to the 4th of December. The other significant thing for people in this zone is that due to COVID lockdown requirements and the fact that the panel chair, David Shepherd, is based in Melbourne, which makes it even trickier, it needs to be done by a streaming setup. So there isn't a location within the Waimakariri district that's been identified that could hold the hearing and provide that service. So the actual venues are listed here in terms of they'll be in the city, effectively in Christchurch City and in Timaru. So that's unfortunate for people residing here in the district, but it's one of the difficulties with the panel chair being based in Melbourne. So I don't know if there's any questions with regards to that, but they're the major changes from the previous month. If not, I'll move on to the regional committee, and I can perhaps hand over to Carolyn, who has provided a report in the meeting papers.
Yep, we'll just take that as read. There's no workshop this month, so the next meeting will be in October, I think, the second Tuesday of October. Were there any questions regarding the minutes?
Yes, Caroline. I can't remember where it was in relation to, but there was some discussion as to the fact there are no time for zone committee updates. Was that ever discussed or seen as a problem, or was that at the last meeting you talked about that anyway? I can't, because of the gaps, I've lost track of that discussion.
Yeah, that was actually something that Murray was going to follow up on.
Yes, and I have relayed that to my colleague who facilitates that committee. So yeah, it's certainly Ted Howard from the Kaikoura zone that I also facilitate with, shared Caroline's frustration, and also seeing the value that's one of the things that the regional committee provides, is that connection across the whole region, and getting to share issues or identify new things. So Ted certainly reinforced that as well. So I've passed that on. So hopefully that'll be something that is an attribute of forward meetings. But I guess there's still some deliberations going on in terms of the regional committee and its role and purpose. So I guess we wait to hear from you, Caroline, really, in terms of how that progresses. There's nothing more on that item. Item 3 is the Land and Water Committee papers and report that I've provided as item 4.2 from the 13 August meeting. So I guess with Councillor Stewart and Sophie and Jared in the room, I don't know if there are any questions with regards to that. I included the full report, just thinking it would be of use to have that and see that as a reference for you. The next item. Oh, sorry.
The Pinevale planting, is that part of? That's not an agenda issue for us. That's only question on that. Yeah. The item there. I was just interested in the actual figure 1 on page 20 something that's indecipherable. Anyway, just which is the direction of flow? I mean, from the both Gumtree and Layman's Road Springs are both springs that then come onto the roadside, onto the side of Fernside, and then do they cross? And then it all just parallels. It just runs beside Fernside Road at that point. Sorry, it's just for clarification. I don't know the area well. Do you know, Sophie? You don't know. Yeah. Follow the road. Follow Fernside Road. Did they go onto other property? That's not roadside, but onto another private property. Okay. That was just a minor thing. Thank you.
Carrying on, if there aren't any more questions on that one. We've got the Zone Committee's working groups, so this is just an opportunity for a quick update from each of the working groups. So I can perhaps hand over to Cam on my right to start with the Land Care Working Group, of which he's provided a short summary.
Thanks, Murray. Yeah, I'll really just take that as read. Just covers a couple of key points that we've been progressing with our Land Care Working Group over the last few weeks. So probably in addition to that, we did complete a walk last Friday over some properties around the spring heads of Silverstream, and have been talking ideas and options and science. So hopefully there's some more progress on that in the coming weeks.
Sorry, just a typo. Is that the 14th of September? Just for the record. You met on Friday the 14th?
Of August.
August, thank you.
Last month.
Thank you. I mean, August, thank you.
So I just had a question, Cam, about that paragraph underneath point 4. What's that around?
That's the as a reminder bit. I guess that was probably more directed at the Zone Committee members around the potential discussion we had originally formed as a working group around just general engagement with various groups, with a focus on farming to start with, but it was envisaged to go out to the general public, urban public, that sort of thing as well. And we have evolved into something that's probably quite different to the original intention around creating a land care group. So there's potential scope that if we wanted to refocus on urban engagement and other groups, that there might be scope for another working group or somewhere else there. So just to emphasise that we're not looking at that as one of our core functions at this stage.
Thank you, Cam. I can probably hand over to Judith now. I've just handed out the summary notes from the Biodiversity Working Group.
Thank you. Yes, the notes are there for the record. So the Biodiversity Working Group was established in August, and we're not a subcommittee. We call ourselves a working group because we're a mix of members and staff from ECAN, ecologists, staff from ECAN and the Taranaki District Council, which has proven in 3 meetings to be a really useful way of getting to know what's going on and getting a good understanding of each other. We met last Friday, and the main things we talked about were getting some drone photography of projects or project areas in the zone. John Cook is an expert drone operator, and he's going to take some video and still photographs, starting with the Ruataniwha River between Floodgates and Revels Road. The idea being to get, once owner permissions are completed, to get some baseline information prior to restoration work that will start later this year. We talked about IMS projects and projects that will be brought to this committee for approval or ratification at the next meeting, but just to have a preliminary discussion about the pros and cons and the values, and to give feedback to Zipper when she's dealing with landowners. We talked about Zipper implementation updates and some of the changes in projects that are happening in Waimakariri district and how funding and other opportunities might arise. One of the ideas which we've talked about at a couple of meetings is the idea of setting up an award that would specifically recognise environmental or conservation or biodiversity work by individuals or groups in the district. Sort of similar to the Community Service Awards, but more perhaps project related, but definitely much more tailored to the environment. We think it's a great idea, but the actual practicalities and the process and the topics and the funding and any criteria for awarding it are obviously going to take us a bit longer to discuss, and so that'll be at the next meeting. But if anybody's got any ideas, particularly what the award might be, whether it's cash or just a nice certificate and a cup of tea, I need to sort of discuss that one. Te Ara Kakariki Trust is a trust operating in Selwyn district, carrying out habitat and biodiversity restoration projects, very well established there. And there's been some discussions between Kate and the trust about them operating or coming into Waimakariri district. Obviously getting having much more involvement by Waimakariri district people, but using their expertise and experience. So that's something that the Biodiversity group is continuing to discuss. Taranaki Reserve, there was a planting day in August, and John and Sophie helped planting in the reserve there, and there's going to be a second planting day probably on the 26th of August, thank you. 26th of September. Zone committee members are going along, and we're going to encourage as many people as possible to come and join it. We really need to get on site to get out of the meeting rooms and get out into the community. So that seemed like a good opportunity. And finally, the Saltwater Catchment group meeting was held. Caroline, I think, will report on this separately, but there was interest in biodiversity and water quality monitoring expressed by the group there, and some of the history of the catchment. And again, the biodiversity working group discussed that, and we'll keep in touch with that catchment group to try and bring the two things together. So the group will meet next on the Thursday, the 1st of October, which will be prior to our next meeting. So we'll repeat this reporting then. Thank you. Any questions?
The third working group, which I've just noted, is what we've called the Coastal Catchments Working Group, which is being led very ably by Caroline. So I'll hand it over to Caroline just for an update.
Thanks, Murray. So we had a meeting on the 25th of August for the Saltwater Creek Catchment. 31 people came along, representing about 24 properties. We ran through the beef and lamb catchment meeting template and got some really good feedback from the group, and the conclusion at the meeting was that they did want to form a catchment group. So we're sort of getting next steps ready for a meeting again on the 6th of October to talk through quite a few things, and yeah, so it's all looking really good.
Thanks, Caroline. That's great. The next item is communications and engagement. So Angus has provided a summary of the significant media coverage in the last month, with particular focus on the removal of trees in the Ashley Rakahuri Regional Park that the committee will be familiar with. Welcome back, David, who joins the meeting. You're all right, David? So look, yeah, Angus has provided the links to those media threads. I don't know if there's anything else or any questions, first of all, perhaps from the committee, and whether there's anything Angus would like to further update the committee on.
Sorry. I mean, was the major event in Rangiora over the last couple of weeks. What is happening on the ground? I mean, Andrew, I think you might be able to help. What is happening to that area now? Do you know? Sorry.
I don't know a huge amount of the detail, but I do know that there's consultation with the community, and it'll be being grassed, and there'll be some planting going in. As an aside to that, I also know that staff, we're meeting WDC and Environment Canterbury tomorrow, actually, just around that consultation process for similar things in the future, to make sure the right steps are followed. Yep, but we'll get a better picture. Perhaps we can make it part of the Braided River workshop next time round. Yep.
I think there is some scope for native plant. I mean, since I did native planting. Yeah. Yep. Just to get it back on the ground. Yep. I mean, because I did write the first engineer's handbook for ECAM, River Engineer's Handbook, and that did include, planting things that are native and will go flat when the flood comes. So it is possible. So great. Thank you.
So I'll find out more for you. Yep.
Thanks, Andrew. The next item is the Action for Healthy Waterways. So what we've included here is an update that I had at the time of preparing the papers. There is, and Angus may want to come up and speak to this a little bit further, but I believe there's a more substantive update now, which probably supersedes what's in the paper. But we can provide that. Obviously, it's as we discussed earlier, an ongoing area of work for further understanding the implications of it. And as noted in the meeting papers, it's come into force as of the 3rd of September. So we're in play at this point. So I don't know if there's any questions with regards to that, and whether Angus or anyone would like to add any further update to what's in the papers.
Perhaps if I could just clarify what that means by in play. So there are different aspects to the Action for Healthy Waterways, and I know quite a few of you are all over this and know it, but there is the National Policy Statement, there is the National Environmental Statement, and then there are the changes to the regulations around in the RMA around stock exclusion. It's the NES, the National Environmental Standard for fresh water, which is in play from the 3rd of September. So that's what was gazetted. Now, I should say the NPS is, but the NPS sets a higher framework from which plans have to line up with it. So the rules, or they're not rules, the guidance that is in the National Policy Statement are then required to be fitted in with Land and Water Regional Plan, as is the case for Canterbury, into the future. So that's what I meant when I said earlier about the monitoring that is specified in the NPS doesn't instantly have to be done today. It has to be part of what's set out in plans, how you're going to do it, and how it lines up with the objectives of plans and things like that. Whereas the National Environmental Standard does come into force, but I would just add one thing that is important to realise, that so the rules particularly around winter grazing, so one of the things about that is the requirement to have a consent to farm, and there has been some information come recently, also a legal opinion was sought by Environment Southland around what that actually means in terms of when do you require a consent, and particularly to do with Cam, you have to help me the legal term, but for rights of use, and so, and what that has said is that, I know a lot of you know this, so I'm kind of repeating it, but for those that don't, the requirement basically says that you've got 6 months from the 3rd of September for it to start. You need to, and then you've got a further 6 months to actually have your consent. Is that the right way? Have I got that the right way around? I'm just trying to think. I'm just trying to remember it through the top of my head.
The rule for winter grazing
yes,
doesn't come into
right.
place until May next year, and so once the rule's
Right.
in place, you have 6 months of existing use rights until you must comply.
Yes, sorry, that's absolutely right, Cam. I'd forgotten that. So the under the NES, the rule comes into effect 6 months from the 3rd of September, and then there is 6 months under existing use rights, and that's basically to allow time for it to be worked through as to what consents are required. And that's particularly in Canterbury, that is the issue as to what consents are required, because some are required under our current rules, and we're still working through around what that actually looks like in terms of what's required under the NES over and above anything that might be in our current rules. So there's the NES does come into effect, but the national policy statement, it comes into effect, but what it means is that we now have to have our plans lining up. Now that then immediately raises the question that I know has been asked before about where does PC7 sit under that. The answer to that is that the hearing commissioners need to take it into consideration, but it doesn't have to line up absolutely with it. And this is partly to do with they can only make changes to do with things that have been submitted on and things like this, but they have to make the best attempt to make it line up, but it doesn't have to be literally lined up with the current NPS because it was notified before this NPS. This is a problem we've had all the time in Canterbury when we've tried to get things in place, and then national policy statements have changed. 2011, 2014. No, I've got there on 14, 17 and 20. So.
Can I just ask, I guess, based on those timelines, Tim, that anything that doesn't line up in Plan Change 7 according to the current rules needs to be addressed by the end of 2024, notified by the end of 2024 anyway?
That's absolutely right, Cam. That's the timeline. And look, what we are trying to work through at the moment as a council is how that will be done. Will that be done at a sub-regional level, or will it be done at a cross-region? And some of that depends on, how much change is involved and what's required. So we haven't. That certainly hasn't been decided yet by council how that would be done.
Sorry, one more question, and perhaps this might be directed towards Councillor Hands too. Is there any indication around the involvement of the Zone Committee in that process, given that there is a fairly strong emphasis on consultation and collaboration within the wording of the MPS itself? In other words, when we're developing our action plans, should this be quite a considerable chunk of that action plan, given the tight timeframes?
As Tim said, there's still a lot of ongoing discussions. Certainly there is a sentiment within the room that we'd like to continue to work with communities, but it all depends where it all lands and what it looks like in terms of how we make those decisions and resourcing and all of that sort of thing. You'll appreciate we've just been through 10 years of writing plans, and it's an expensive exercise, and collaboration has been hard. The sentiment of working with the community is very much still there with most councillors. I wouldn't be remiss, it wouldn't be wrong in saying that, but there may be some further decisions to come. But any advocacy around the way in which you would like to see that as a community or as a zone committee, I think would be appreciated and be welcomed.
I mean, Councillor Hands is absolutely right. I think, I guess the only thing I'd add to that is it's really difficult to see us going back into a full PC7 type of thing for this, but at the same time there is certainly a desire to be working with community around it, and it's a real tension, particularly with those time frames. So.
Just one more question, Tim. Just in terms of who is working with from the Environment Canterbury in terms of with the government to see how these policies are going to work out, because I understand that Minister Parker has established a working group with the regional councils. So who who from Environment Canterbury is on that working group?
The key person from a staffing perspective is Nadine Domacy, who's the Chief Operating Officer. You probably know Nadine. She's involved in the freshwater implementation group. Stephanie, as Chief Executive, is also involved in, I just get my groups a little bit mixed up, I must confess, but she is involved in one as well, and I'm just trying to remember. Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, it's a good question because, it's come at a time of considerable change with Environment Canterbury, but we've really tried to stay in there, and it's been through Nadine and now with Stephanie confirmed in the position, that's meant that she really is firmly in that seat as well. So we are really trying to stay in that space as much as possible.
Thank you, Tim. I appreciate you clarifying what I meant by in play. Yeah, quite a lot, yeah. So just capturing that for the record, Angus is just highlighting that there's more comms to come around this and also integrating with other groups. Yeah, and there's some on the website now for those that are listening and keen to follow up. The next item under committee updates, item 7, provides the committee with an update on the zone committee review. So at the previous meeting and workshop that the committee had in August, there was an opportunity to provide some feedback on the proposed or the review that's occurring and proposed changes to the terms of reference and the introduction of a letter of shared priorities. What's included in the meeting papers is the Waimakariri District Council report, which follows on from the committee's feedback and was presented to the council, I think on the 1st of September. So whether Councillor Stewart or Sophie want to add anything, or if there are any questions with regards to the report that the Waimakariri District Council has received as part of the review process. Okay, folks, moving on. It's just the final action points from the previous meeting. So we had the MKT report, which hopefully the committee will get a hard copy in with their meeting papers. That was asked for circulation. We also had the discussion at the previous meeting around the LAWA website. But following on from that discussion, Chairman Blackwell noted that there were those sites that weren't being monitored as they had previously. So we've noted that as an ongoing point of follow-up. And I don't know if Adrian at all wants to speak to it. We've just noted that that's something to follow up with NIWA, who do the monitoring of those two sites. So Adrian does look like he's...
Thank you, Murray. Both Tim Davey and myself both followed up with the administrator at LAWA as to why that data at Waimakariri Old Highway Bridge was not showing up on the LAWA website, whereas the Gorge Bridge data was. As we noted, both that data is all generated from the NIWA National Rivers Water Quality Monitoring Network, so we don't own the data. They provide it to LAWA. What we found out was there was a link broken in terms of the Old Highway Bridge data. We discussed that with the administrator at Lawa. They've endeavoured to fix that link, and they assure us that as of September, that data will be being downloaded back onto the website again, and so it should be up this month. I haven't checked whether it is today yet, but they've assured us they've fixed that link. It's probably worth saying that ECAN has been paying for these NIWA National Rivers Water Quality Network sites for the last year or so. We're probably going to take them over, so they may well come under our umbrella, so that'll be one less step to have these sort of errors in the future, but we're pretty much assured that we hope the data should be displayed this month and it'll be up to speed again.
Thank you, Adrian. And the final point we've followed up at the start of the meeting in terms of the presentation by Adrian on the Kaiapoi River salinity data logging. That'd be the updates.
Any further questions?
Sorry, I just have a question, I guess, for Sophie on the MKT report on the floodgates. Just in there is sort of quite brief assessment of the proposal, and I guess it might be for you as well, Pata and John. The next to last bullet point on page 2 is that the tide gate will change the location of the saltwater wedge, i.e. the area where freshwater overlays I think it should be saltwater overlays freshwater, and that would likely affect inanga spawning areas in the vicinity. And I wondered if there's anything in the proposal that identified that actually it could positively just move. It's only going to move the saltwater wedge, and so the inanga spawning will simply, possibly move. It's not necessarily a detrimental effect, but it actually could be positive because you get better habitat, because you're actually creating habitat and managing it. And I just wondered if that was ever taken into consideration in the proposal and therefore in the assessment. It just seemed possibly a slightly negative thing on what could have become a positive aspect of the proposal.
So it wasn't an assessment of effects, that report. It was saying these are the things that the feasibility study would look at. So
okay,
yeah,
so
it was because there's so many. It was basically listing these are the kinds of things we need to look at.
But it wasn't looking at them.
No, because it's a big thing to say where would it move to?
Yeah.
Would it move to a place where the banks were steeper, or
so who's going to follow up on that? How does it? What happens to this report?
Yeah, so the reply report from NKT was that the Runanga were opposed to the proposal.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that means that our council, the motion that was passed by the Utilities and Roading Committee was that we would not proceed if either Runanga or Environment Canterbury didn't want for that feasibility study to proceed. So that's where
even the study to proceed.
Yes. So it's a feasibility study that we were proposing, not
the work.
Not the actual work.
Yeah.
And so this hasn't actually gone to our Utilities and Roading Committee again, or was it Land and Water Committee? Yeah. Okay. So it will go back. We will present this report to our council. It hasn't actually been officially presented yet.
Okay. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And
so, according to the motion that was made at the previous when it was presented, we think the council will no longer proceed with the.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, just out of curiosity, who commissioned the report?
So that was commissioned by WDC for Mahuru Kurataiao to consult with the Kaitiaki representatives for Ngāti Ahuriri.
Yeah. So I understand that then, but if it was coming from the zone committee, then there's no need to engage NKT because you have two mandated representatives at the table, just for future reference.
I mean, it just seemed that seems quite negative. I mean, I can appreciate in the Wahi Tapu, I can see that could be a problem. On the things I know something about, they seem to be quite negative without actually looking at positives. And I just wondered if that was because WDC actually hadn't thought about the positives to offer them in the first place. But I'm not, just because it's still such early days, they haven't even thought of those. Is that right?
Yeah, so are you looking at, sorry, there's both the MKT report, but there was a previous report that I put together.
So it's that's what they were assessing?
No, we didn't say, this is I tried to be unbiased and say this is the information about the project and what we think it will cost and some of the potential effects, which could be positive or negative. But we just need to consider these effects. And so I wasn't trying to say which way, but just saying, and so it was a a report for context, but it
Yeah.
wasn't for them to make a decision based on. They actually sought independent advice, and I think that's stated in that MKT report that they came to 2 meetings because of there was extra information needed that they needed to find out
it was
themselves.
more than just 2 reports provided to each other.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. Yes.
Thank you.
Oh yeah. Any further questions? All right. So we have a recommendation that the Waimakariri Zone Committee receive these updates for its information and with reference to the committee's 2020-2021 work program and engagement priorities. Do I have a mover and a seconder, please? Cam, thank you. John. Carried. Well, all those in favour? Better not rush that one. Sorry. Yep. Cool. Alrighty, item 5, confirmation of minutes of the previous zone meeting on the 3rd of August 2020. Which I think we all have copies of. So, again, we have a recommendation that we confirm these minutes as a true and accurate record. Can I have a mover, please? Yep, Judith, seconder. Caroline, thank you. All those in favour? All right. Matters arising. That was easy. Right. General business. All right. Caroline. You can be. It's all right. We're used to that.
I just had a correction. Is now the time for corrections?
It's normally under matters arising.
Oh,
there you go.
Okay, thank you. We do need some training, don't we, in this type of thing? Well, I do anyway. So just on page 69, paragraph 7.2, that was about the loss of the shingle removal in the Ashley River, how that would impact the nesting river birds rather than the quarry itself. Yeah. Thanks.
Any other matters? Righty, general business, item 6. Murray, have you got any general business? No? Anything from the floor? Staff members, anything you'd like to raise?
Just because this meeting's going to be too short, so I'll ask a question to keep things going. This might be a matter for Tim or anyone else who's got expertise around the table. The new regulations around freshwater specifically say freshwater. Arguably, we've got some waterways that sometimes are freshwater, sometimes saltwater. What is that? What are the implications of that for targets in our zone or in Canterbury in general? Or are they even doomed to waterway? Are they doomed to an estuary or a lake, as you were saying?
I think they're all hiding.
Perhaps we could table that, and that might just be an update for a future meeting.
Tim's looking brave. Yeah.
What I can't remember is what it actually says about the coastal, if it adds anything different to if it adds anything different, which is very much in the freshwater environments. I don't think it does, but at the same time it doesn't preclude any council working in that environment. So it is predominantly about freshwater. It is about being integrated, and the whole concept of Te Mana o Te Wai, a lot of that is about integration across a range of different environments. So I think there would be an expectation that it would be working, but it doesn't get down to talk about specific ways that those could be addressed. Is it? I mean, how do you feel about that, Adrian? I'm just trying to.
Yeah, I think we're still trying to come to terms with it. The national policy statement of freshwater management certainly does, in the early sections, sort of talk about the concept of kia te kitai and integrated rivers, and sort of saying the connection, and actually mentions the connection to the sea. So I think it's in a broad sense encouraging us to look at rivers right down to their connection to the sea and even to their effect on the sea. But it's sort of a high level.
Yeah, I guess my question's probably more around, because you're right, the principles do seem to apply to waterways no matter where they are, really, but it's around particularly some of the measures. They're talking about 90% of protection for 90% of indigenous freshwater species, but when you've got a saltwater environment, obviously that's quite difficult, or if it's tidal, it could be quite difficult. So I guess it was just probably more around the application of targets for some of the bottom lines, and particularly for us, where should we be aiming, and what parts would fall under a coastal plan versus a Plan Change 7 or a land and water regional plan.
I'm also just wondering, thinking of salmon fisheries, you need a license within, is it 50 or 500 metres of the mouth? Yeah. So that kind of gives you some direction around the fresh water, yeah.
I've just done a word search on the MPS for everyone. There is only 4 mentions of coastal marine area within the document, but one of them is that receiving environment includes but is not limited to any water body, river, lake, wetland, or aquifer, and the coastal marine area, including estuaries. But a wetland within an estuarine area isn't considered, within a marine area isn't considered a freshwater wetland. It's got separate rules. So yeah, it will be included in the receiving environment, but there's not anything further than that.
Yeah, a brackish grey. Is that? Perhaps I could then take the opportunity to talk a little bit. Well, I'll ask Adrian actually to talk a little bit about some work that we are just initiating around monitoring of hapua around the region. So I'll hand on to you, Adrian, because you know far more about it than I do. But
yeah, well, the sort of hapua, or the sort of the sort of ponded river mouths of many of our big braided rivers, are increasingly becoming a focus for our work, and certainly in two areas. One, you may be aware, in the Waipara and the Haranui rivers and things, we're installing sort of level loggers, water quality loggers and things to start to understand those dynamic areas a little bit more. It's got parallels with what we've maybe been talking about in the Kaiapoi River as well, to sort of start acknowledging those. We're also this summer proposing to do some fish surveys down at some of our river mouths, and this is likely to extend for the next 3 or 4 years. We'll be starting on the big braided rivers down on the Rangitata, the Ashburton and the Rakaia, but then probably in the second year moving north into Waimakariri, Ashley, Haranui and things like that as well. But really to sort of update, they haven't really been surveyed for their fisheries populations for maybe 30 or 40 years. We get a lot of comment on that, and therefore we're trying to make a start on that of monitoring the fish populations of those hapua or estuarine areas to sort of see what the state they're in compared to when they were last comprehensively surveyed 30 or 40 years ago. And really it's what that's flagging is that they're increasingly coming onto our work programs to look at that, and I think that's in keeping with where some of the words in the National Policy Statement is sort of encouraging us to look at that connectiveness to the sea.
And just to be absolutely certain for everybody here that when we talk about fish, we're talking about multiple species. We're not just talking about trout and salmon. We're talking particularly about native species.
Yeah.
Shellfish.
Initially, we're looking at the fish, the swimming fish, but inherently we're also, while we're there, looking at the habitat, which is the sediment, the algae and things like that, and inherently we'll be looking at the shellfish probably as well, as you know, that'll broaden out what's the state of those environments. Once again, I don't think we're closing off any avenue to sort of report on those environments, but it's starting from a fish and a water quality perspective, and it'll move on from there.
And it's a really good question, because part of what we're doing is exploring what monitoring is really needed in these spaces. So that, you know, we're sort of doing some scoping, and then out of that we can go, okay, we need to do this more regularly with these parameters, and shellfish may well be part of that.
Thank you, gents. Oh, no, very informative. Anything else under general business? Right, I've got one small item I thought I'd bring up. Because I think as a very close working group, we form quite a strong team here at the Waimakariri Zone Committee. And one of our members might be putting a hand up to join another team that needs propping up at the moment. So, Megan, do you want to pass comment at all on that?
Obviously, everyone has read the news. I am the National Party's new candidate for Rangatahi. So I am very busy juggling both my council roles and that role for the next, I don't know how many weeks I've got left, 7 weeks. So very busy. I am still doing council stuff, but the best way to get hold of me at the moment is by phone, usually late evening or very early morning if anyone wants to get in touch. But I will still pick up the phone. I am still attending council meetings, albeit not all council briefings, and trying to keep abreast of as much as I can as we move forward. But other than that, yeah, it's just a bit of a busy time at the moment. Sometimes life throws up opportunities that you've just got to grab and go with. So that's what I've done. Cool.
I'm sure we wish you well. Yep. Alright, anything else? Right. Stephen, could you close the meeting for us, please, with a karakia? Thank you very much. Right, so the next meeting will be held on the 5th of October. Not sure where. We'll see. It is going to be here. Righto. Hopefully not under level 2. So safe travels and look after each other. Thank you.